Hello and welcome to this RedMonk conversation. My name is Kate Holterhoff. I'm a senior analyst at RedMonk, and with me today is Nikhil Mungel, the head of AI R&D at Cribl. Nikhil, thank you so much for joining me here on the Monkcast.
Excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Kate.
Awesome. All right, so let's just start off with some introductions here. Tell me about yourself and what you do at Cribl.
Sure. So at Cribl, I have the very fun job of leading all AI research and development. So I lead engineering management as well as product management when it comes to AI research at Cribl. So I have a few teams that I support, which are building agentic products that simplify the lives of IT practitioners and security practitioners. And then I also lead a research lab team where we train our own models that can work on really high throughput streaming telemetry data. I mean, that's what Cribl does as a company. That's what we specialize in. So yeah, would love to share more about what we do and, where the industry is going with AI as it applies to telemetry and observability and security use cases today.
Okay, so we are definitely going to be digging into that. I figured we kind of start this conversation around some of the things that you've written. So I am specifically excited to have someone who's an expert on like FinOps and agent space on the show because I think token spend, we can all agree, is top of mind. It's become a real pain point for a lot of folks. And you've written about this in the context of the first agent that your team has shipped. So can you walk us through what happened there and what you actually saw in terms of that sort of larger question for our conversation of telemetry?
Sure. Yeah. So it's yes, tokens and token costs are a pretty hot button topic, right now in August of 2026.
Yeah.
It's token costs also keep dropping compared to a few years ago, but then token use is going up quite a bit. I mean, models today and use cases that are powered by, LLMs today are much more complex. They're much more longer running, and they tend to consume a lot more tokens than some of the use cases that we used to have back in 2022 and 2023. So as an aggregate, companies are spending a lot more on tokens today than they were a couple of years ago. And I think it's pretty valuable. I mean, I feel like tokens are adding tangible benefits. We, at Cribl, we lean a lot on, so there are two ways in which we use agents. One is baking agents into the product itself that helps our customers and our users a much more smoother experience when it's using the product and when it's taking the value out of whatever Cribl deployment is configured to do. And then on the other side, we also use agentic software development and agentic research for the stuff that we do internally as well. So when we are training new models, we have a research agent that helps us. And when we are writing code, obviously we use agentic coding tools like Claude Code and Cursor and OpenAI Codex as well. So I would love to share a personal experience where we had this runaway agent that accrued a massive token bill, and I'm pretty sure a lot of listeners are going to have to. They've been in similar situations, I feel like.
Yeah, let's hear about it.
Yeah. So one of the teams that I support is our AI research team, where we train. We have a little GPU setup here in San Francisco, where I'm talking to you today from, and we run experimentation, and we run research experimentation, where we train new models that can operate on high throughput telemetry data. Now, these models are a little different from LLMs, since LLMs can, AI models, multimodal AI models can intelligently come up with answers to the questions you're asking, etc. In the world of telemetry, it's a little bit different because you're dealing with a lot of really high throughput streaming logs. So you have terabytes of logs that are being processed by Cribl every single hour for every customer. Sometimes it's tens of terabytes every single hour. So using LLM like Claude, or using a model like Claude, or using a model like GPT-5.6 is not really feasible for those sort of volumes of data that we deal with. So we design our own models to do that, and we have a research agent that runs in a loop overnight. So we run, we ask it to run several experiments, and then it's able to go and it's able to run these models, run based on an objective function, and gauge the loss overnight, and then in the morning when the researchers come in, they're able to see the progress that was made overnight. So the objective function of an agent is really, or when it's running in a loop, is a goal that you give it, and then it optimizes for that goal and uses that goal to really train one of these models that we have. So a few months ago, or a couple of months ago, we had this agent that was going off and training a model, and its objective function was to keep thinking more, right? I mean, the way somebody had written that experiment was, it's like the more you
Uh-oh.
think, the better the output is going to be. So the agent, just every call it made to an LLM was like, oh, cool, like this is great. I'm going to do more of this. And in the morning, when the researcher logged on, we found out that it had accrued an enormous token bill that I'm not going to share the exact number, but it was quite a bit, and that was a big shock. And ever since then, we've been a little bit more thoughtful about how we structure these experiments, and also put in some guardrails in terms of how many tokens a single experiment can consume before it raises or taps a human researcher on the shoulder and asks it whether it should continue.
Oh, wow. Okay. Such a good example of why guardrails are becoming more and more important today.
Yeah.
All right. And so, this is just one example, I suspect, of many. I'd love to hear some of the trends that you're seeing around this, I guess. So, okay, are companies that you're speaking with using AI and agents to address observability in practice? How is it that AI has shifted the way that you've approached this more recently in our sort of agentic present?
Yeah, I think so. The way I think about this is in two parts. First, there is a lot more software today than there was like 2 years ago, right? Because of
Mm,
agent coding and because how approachable and easy agentic coding tools have made for teams to produce software. Teams have been producing a lot more software, uh, in the last few years than they had historically done. Right? I mean, a team of 5 can now build extremely complex systems, whereas before agentic coding took off, it would probably take you 50 engineers or 50 developers to do the same thing. And
hmm
because of that, because of the growth in the amount of software that has been put out there, the operational footprint has also grown sufficiently complex. So in a way, you don't have an option but to rely on agentic SRE tools, agentic observability tools to really understand, how your application and how your software is behaving in production. So, um, one example that comes to mind is how. So if you have any software system that has agents within it to deliver user functionality and user value, these agents are running uh, many times in a in a window of time compared to a human operator or a human SRE would have done. And they're producing a lot more. They're producing a lot more data. They're hitting the microservices or any server side compute that you may have a lot more, and it's just creating a massive increase in telemetry that we have been seeing across the industry. And in order to make sense of all this telemetry, you need to ingest it, you need to store it, you need to do all the best practices that you have been doing so far. And in order to reduce the burden on your operational teams, your SRE teams, your IT ops teams, and your DevOps team and your DevSecOps teams, you have to lean on agentic uh, tools to take away some of that burden from the other side of the house as well.
Right. Yeah, we've been tracking the amount of code that has been published recently, and it's staggering. Okay, so you've also written a little bit about agentic SaaS specifically, and arguing around cost being a reliability metric. So we've seen more attention on token spend. I'm thinking about the Linux foundations. They've just launched their
Yeah.
tokenomics foundation, for instance. I am not hearing panic yet, but from your perspective, is this becoming a bigger deal for folks like CFOs?
Yeah, I think it is. And if you again split token expenses between what your internal employee workforce is using to drive productivity, and the first thing
Mm,
you want to separate that out from the token spend that your SaaS is driving to deliver value to your customers, right? So if you take an average software engineering company or a SaaS company, you have the SaaS that it produces, which is sold to customers, and it's usually a high margin business. And then you also have developers and product managers and employees and staff who are using tools like Cloud Code to deliver and build that SaaS. There's been a lot of focus on like the internal token usage right now, because that's
Hmm.
that you have. There's typically no bound on it, or there's a very high bound on how many tokens an individual employee can use and to deliver value. So that's one part of the equation that we can get into. But the second part is your COGS, or cost of goods sold, that your SaaS is accumulating when you're delivering value to customers. What's one unique thing that we have, or maybe it's not even that unique, but one thing that we have seen happen in the last couple of years is customers have demanded that vendors support agentic flows within their software. Nobody wants to use software 1.0 where you have to manually configure the software and like go through like 6 or 7 different configuration screens and like look at docs and stuff like that, right? Everyone wants an easy button to set up whatever it is that they're doing, right? Maybe it's creating a ticket on Jira. Maybe it's, setting up an observability pipeline in Cribl. Whatever it is that you want to do, everyone wants an easy button and agentic flow. Have you seen that as well?
I It's funny. I was just talking about ClickOps
Yeah.
today, and sort of how it is that agents
Yeah.
can best use these infrastructure tools. Is it that it's just through like a Terraform something, or
Yeah.
is it that everything's going to be through API keys now? Or I think it was like 9 months ago, everybody was talking about like, oh, I need an agent to buy me a plane ticket. I'm going to give it access to my browser. So I do feel like there is this. It's kind of an open question
Right.
right now, but I absolutely am seeing it as like something that we're grappling with. I guess
Yeah.
I am not sure where it's landing at this point.
100%, right? And when you really try to unbundle, how much tokens your SaaS is consuming to deliver value to your customers, that's when things start
Yeah.
getting really, really tricky, right? And that's the stuff that CFOs care a lot about, is like, hey, are you running a high margin business or are you running a low margin business? Really, that's where it comes down to.
Hmm.
And when you look at tools out in the, or SaaS products, or just any products out there in the market today, I've seen like two types of billing models that seem to have been catching on. One is some sort
Mm.
of a based model. So if you look at something like Notion, you purchase AI credits that then you can use for generating, documents, summarizing documents. So every agentic flow that you use within the product consumes some sort of credits. And that's one way to uh, pass on some of those costs back to your customers and not end up in a low margin business. And then on the
Mm.
second hand, I've also seen tools offering a more outcome-based uh, billing model. So, if you have an agentic SRE tool, you may charge customers based on the number of incidents it closes, or, the how quickly it is able to close an incident or an investigation, regardless of the token used, right? So in that case, companies or like SaaS vendors are now incentivized to drive the same outcome using as few tokens as possible, or using a smaller model instead of a frontier model for some of those tasks. So there's a bunch of a lot of R&D these days is happening around how do you drive down marginal costs for delivering value to customers. Smaller models have also gotten really better at a lot of tasks. So you don't really need the beefiest model for every task, right? And there are so many different model architectures, and you can have like an Oracle architecture where you have a smaller model that's running a task, and then it consults with a much smarter model as it needs. And you can have the pretty tangible effect on token costs if you use one of these patterns to drive down costs when you're operating a SaaS business.
Okay, that makes sense. I guess I'd be interested in hearing how you're pivoting these observations and I guess just the way that you are handling research right now. Toward governance and some of the things that a lot of the leadership are
Yeah.
concerned around these subjects. So yeah, what's your general stance towards governance when it comes to agents?
I think we are so early in the game right now,
Yeah.
and government's just about to take off in a really big way. I mean, it kind of reminds me of like the early cloud days, like 15 years ago or something, where companies were trying to rein in, cloud usage. And I don't remember which CFO it was, but somebody interviewed them and they're like, "Hey, how do you use any cloud? Do you have any cloud exposure?" And it's like, "No, we don't use cloud at our company." And then they
Yeah.
surveyed the employee population, and they had like 100 cloud accounts, right? So there's just a lot of shadow use. There's a lot of shadow agent use. There's a lot of shadow MCP use, which is fine because a lot of businesses right now are trying to turn around and deliver an ROI on all this token spend that we just talked about earlier. So people
Hmm.
are okay. Enterprises have been okay to move a little fast and, maybe bend some certain rules somewhere to, just lock in those productivity gains. But we've slowly started to see the shift happening between let's move fast and drive value. Well, the value is there. The value is there for everyone to see. If you use AI, you're more productive than if you're not using AI. So it's fast. It's quickly moving to a place where governance is becoming super important. And the successes that I've seen with good governance, it just starts with creating a good policy, right? I mean, you can't govern if you don't have policy. So successful enterprises or enterprises that have been successful in governance have been successful in establishing a policy that makes sense uh, for the employee workforce. And it's best done at the department level. Like the governance policy for an IT team is going to be different from that for an engineering team. It's going to be different for a marketing team. But having that policy is like the first step. And once you have that policy, then there are a few SaaS tools available for you to establish governance, or you can work with a variety of vendors to um, uh, get that out there. And there are many strategies to govern as well. Happy to go into those. But that's where I'm seeing the shift right now. There is governance not only from a and so what do most of these policies include? There's a cost component. So like, how much are you allowed to spend? There's an access component, like what sort of data you're allowed to access. And then there's what I like to call a blast radius, where, if you're using an agentic software, an agentic tool in a production system that has a much larger blast radius, right? If something goes wrong, it might take down a lot of your production instances, like it might delete data from databases and, might suffer data loss, etc. Whereas if you're running an agentic coding assistant locally on your computer, the blast radius is limited, right, to just your local machine, right? You're not going to be deleting data that you have stored for your customers. So different policy makes sense in both those different settings.
Right. I'm glad you brought up the locally running models too, because you had mentioned small models, but I feel like what we're hearing a lot of is this interest
Yeah.
in having these models, yeah, just running off of private machines. I mean, this has always been a big deal for especially highly regulated industries, ones that have historically needed air gapping and things like that. So
Yeah.
and frankly, the security issues right now are deeply unsettled and unsettling. This is certainly aligning really well with some of the things that we've been following. I guess what I'd want to hear more about then is how observability and telemetry come into that. Like, what is I guess what is your stance right now in terms of like how you're handling this at Cribl?
Sure. We help customers capture, your LLM traces, your token routing traces, your how your endpoints are engaging if there are like shadow MCPs running on your computer, how
Yeah.
your cloud security posture exists, right? If you have like configured a bunch of resources on a hyperscaler like AWS or GCP. So we do all those sort of things and, collect all of that data for you. And then the beauty is that we are able to route that data to whatever destination you choose. So it could be a SIM that you already have. It could be a just an S3 bucket that you just want to store data in and, look at it for auditability purposes or investigative purposes a few years down the line. That's where we've really seen a lot of observability and telemetry use cases come to light. And one of the products that my team launched end of last year, is called Cribl Guard, which enables you to scan and redact sensitive information from your telemetry data, which is kind of pretty relevant these days, right? I mean, so do you remember back when we had like the first chat GPT moment 3 or 4 years ago. At this point, everyone was very hesitant about the sort of information you should be putting into chat GPT or Claude. And now everyone is pouring their innermost thoughts in chatbots.
For
And
sure.
stuff gets logged, like it gets logged, it gets exposed in compliance APIs, especially if you're using a chat subscription that's provided by your employer, then it's 100% getting logged. If you're directly purchasing it yourself, then maybe it's not getting logged. Um, but one of the cool things is that when it does get logged, you don't want that personal private information to be stored anywhere. So you can use a product like Cribl Guard to scrub it out and remove sensitive information from your telemetry logs, right? So if somebody puts in their social security number or, some private health information in there, Guard can be used to scrub it out. I will say though, it's not going to scrub out your innermost thoughts. So those will still be there in text. So, you should be careful about what you put in, when you're using an employee sponsored chatbot product. But those are some of the use cases that we have seen.
Okay. And some of the ways that I have heard you frame this in your writing around the subject has been with guardrails. And I feel like we've kind of alluded to this already here. So
Yeah.
talk to me about the role of guardrails in all of this. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. So guardrails really help you enforce policy, right? So you want to
Mm,
enforce somewhere in the chain, and there's multiple places where you can do it, right? You can do it at like the token gateway routing. So, and just for clarity, a token gateway or an AI gateway is a single choke point that can be deployed into an enterprise, or you can use an open product like Open Router. And what you want to do is you want to route all AI usage through that gateway. So that gateway is
hmm
just for the right model, the right intelligence based on the task. It can fall back between multiple model providers. So if one model provider is not available, it can go to the next model provider. And most importantly, it can enforce policy. It can enforce these guardrails. So if a particular agent or a system or a person is using more tokens than they should be using, the gateway can enforce that policy and start rate limiting them, or maybe degrade them to a lesser capable model, if they use their quota for a more intelligent frontier model. So it can do all kinds of interesting things, right? Again, based on the policy that you want to enforce governance around and guardrails around. And then when it comes to uh, privacy and deep sensitive data, which is something that I spend a lot of time thinking about, guardrails enable you to prevent sensitive information from getting into places where you don't want it to get into. Because if it does escape something, or if it does escape into or leak into, destinations or, surfaces where it's not supposed to, then you risk being out of compliance. You might be, moving out of, or you might be in violation of a SOC 2 compliance or, an ISO compliance or a FedRAMP compliance control, right? So you have these compliance controls and you want to make sure that you're adhering to those compliance controls. And that's where guardrails are really, really important. Something else I'll add to that is software 1.0, which is, what I like to call software that was all the systems and enterprise tools that people used before the advent of modern agentic coding and agentic development. Used to just have a bunch of buttons and, radio buttons and checkboxes and, a few fields, etc., where it was a very, very much an on Rails experience. Software today has a lot of free form text inputs, right? Like a prompt box where you can just go in and you can just describe, oh, I'm looking for so-and-so information. And I'm looking for, you might go into your business analysis system and you can ask questions like, hey, show me, why did this particular customer start using more of my product? Or, why did this customer churn? And those sort of things. And even that text that you input into these boxes tends to have extremely sensitive information, which
Mm.
now you have to protect, right? Because it all gets logged. It, gets into telemetry data, right? It ends up in anything that your users type into a prompt box in your product is going to end up in a telemetry pipeline somewhere. And if it goes in the wrong destination, then you're going to be in violation of a compliance control. And that's why guardrails have become even more important in agentic in the world of agents.
And in terms of cost, we've talked about tokenomics here, but it also feels like this could be a solution around telemetry cost as well. So is there a way that gateways are also serving a similar function there?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, gateways do, all kinds of really clever things these days. You can, one of the cool things that I've seen gateways do is obviously enforce rate limits. So you can only consume, everyone has a quota, and that quota can be on an individual basis, can be on a team basis, can be on a department basis, right? And that's something that, usually the CFO or the CIO will determine what makes the most sense in terms of an investment standpoint. And then
Hmm.
there's an interesting phenomenon when you give your users the ability to pick a model. Your user is always going to pick the most expensive model, right? Regardless of the task that you're doing, because everyone feels that the thing that they're working is, the most important thing in the world. And who wants to use a less capable model, right? So you're going to pick the best one. And I like to call it model anxiety, right? Where you're just like always going with the most expensive model and accruing token costs. And really good token gateway products out there are able to abstract that away from your users. So the token gateway will be responsible for gauging how complex a query is and routing it to the model that's uh, the smallest model that's capable of addressing that query,
Mm.
removing that decision burden from users to select a model, right? So you just fire off a query, and Cursor, for example, does this really well. When you use Cursor for writing code, they launched a feature recently which is called Auto Router, where you don't have to pick a model, right? It'll do it for you, and you can just focus on the task that you have in front of you. And that is something that I've seen drive down costs quite a bit on the consuming side.
Yeah, I agree that that's where the future is heading. I think having the option of choosing your own model can be
Yeah,
valuable, but ultimately, who wants to make that decision for every little thing? And then I kick myself when I'm using Claude and I accidentally use Fable or something for like
yeah,
a dumb little query, like because it was just already that's what I had it set up for.
that's right. Yeah,
All right. So I want to get back in this security issue, which I feel like we've kind of been circling around anyways. I mean, and so much rust on that. And so you've been involved with this organization called the Open Cybersecurity Schema Framework. Can you
Mhm.
talk about that? I learned about it from some of your writing on the subject, and I thought it was fascinating. So yeah, what is that?
Yeah, yeah. OCSF is it's called OCSF, and it's a format for capturing and storing telemetry data so that it can be used by security products like a SIM product or like a number of security products. And it was a standard that was born out of a few companies like Amazon and Splunk. It's only like 3 or 4 years old, and
Okay.
the adoption of OCSF has been phenomenal because it's such a robust format. So yeah, I've been lucky to be involved with the OCSF community. We had a dinner at RSA just a few months ago, and there was a
Awesome.
very welcoming community. If people are interested in contributing to OCSF or uh, being a part of the group that develops that standard. There's a call Tuesday mornings that I occasionally will dial into. But yeah, it's a format that standardizes logs, right, or telemetry information. If I had to put it in a simple way, so you have logs and telemetry information that's coming in from microservices. You have it coming in from endpoints like my computer, for example. You have it coming from networking equipment, and every appliance, every equipment, every service, every application has a slightly different way of emitting telemetry data, right? And
Mm.
OCS standardizes that. It standardizes that into like dozens of different types, and there's uh, a structure that it brings to the process. So when you store data or when you convert your logs and your telemetry data to OCSF, it all looks the same. Like when you're looking at firewall logs, doesn't matter if they came from a Palo Alto appliance or if they came from a Cisco appliance, they're going to be structured in the exact same way, which has a
Hmm.
bunch of downstream, right? I mean, if data is structured in a particular way, it can be stored in a way that's really fast to retrieve it. You can index it. You can optimize storage. You can reduce duplication. There's a lot of interesting things that you can do from an engineering standpoint when you're handed structured data. And again, the reason why this is really important is the sheer volume of data that we deal with when it comes to telemetry, right? I mean, enterprises are creating petabytes of telemetry every single day. And then when there's an incident, when there's an investigation, you want to be able to pull insights from petabytes of telemetry pretty much instantaneously, right? Because there's an operator, you got paged, maybe there's a security incident and you're going into whatever tool you're using and you're like, well, show me what happened. And the system now has to comb through petabytes of information to give you that answer, right? I mean, if you think about it, one way that I like to explain observability and telemetry to people is it's an information compression problem, right? You're trying to go from petabytes of data to like a kilobyte of data that can be presented to a human being, right? You're trying to go from all these logs into like a sentence. Like, tell me what happened. Like, which service is failing right now? Or, where's the intrusion? And in order to do that, you need all these optimizations that OCSF brings you, or OCSF brings to the game. And, storage systems can then take advantage of this structure to save that data and store that data and index it and, pre-process that data so that it's fast to retrieve that data. I'll put in a plug by saying, one of my teams has created this awesome product called Copilot Editor, which can be used to transform data into OCSF. So you can create, if you have high throughput streaming data that you want to convert into an OCSF format, be the latest version or, even we support like several versions, it will automatically convert that data into OCSF for you. And it's an open format, right? It's an Open Cybersecurity format. So you can, convert it to OCSF and then you can send it to whatever destination of your choice. And then you can take, advantage of what the OCSF ecosystem brings to the game.
Yeah. I mean, it just makes so much sense.
I'm really passionate about OCSF, so I can't stop talking about it.
No, I actually want to hear a little bit more about it. So am I right in assuming then that because of AI and because we have just all of these systems that the need has always been there, but it is so important now that the community is finally like, okay, we need to do this because 3 years ago, that was really when these things kicked off. Is that accurate, or has it just been brewing for so long it was going to happen eventually?
Yeah, it's been brewing for a while. I mean, OCSF,
okay.
And the forces that led to the creation of OCSF have been around even before agentic AI took over.
Yeah.
It supports agentic traces, it supports LLM traces, it supports agentic observability. So it's, I think there's a new OCSF version that comes out every few months, and the team does a fantastic job of keeping up that standard. And the vendors that support OCSF do a fantastic job of adhering to that standard. So if you're, sending your data to Amazon Security Lake or, whatever SIM that you're sending to, they're usually pretty up to date on stuff.
Huh. My goodness. How many people are working on it right now? I mean, this sounds like it must be a very robust community.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like the community is, it's a handful of people. I mean, like 6 or 7 core committee members. I'm not a core committee member, but I know several of the core committee members. And they work, all of them work at different vendors, which is really what makes it a pretty well-adopted standard.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Well, I appreciate you talking about that. We'll be sure to put a link in the show notes for folks who want to learn more about that particular community here, because I learned something. So yeah, I feel like we could still dig in a little bit deeper to this like agent telemetry question here. So how about the issue of retention? Like in regulated industries, that's a huge issue. The cost of it can be pretty daunting here. So I guess one aspect of that is like, should an agent be fed its own cost as like a planning input? I mean, there's a couple ways to go with this, but yeah, what's your sense around that?
I think so. When it comes to data retention, one of the hottest topics has been ZDR, or zero data retention, right? Which is which really means that whoever is giving you or whoever is fulfilling your inference should not be storing a copy, of the inputs and the outputs that came from the model, which in theory makes a lot of sense. If you're an enterprise, you don't want your LLM vendor to store like a copy of your data. But then there's also the issue of safety as it pertains to LLMs. And this is something that I'm actually pretty, I have a lot of opinions on this, which is, you can, I mean, these are really exceptionally intelligent models, and you have to have safeguards around these models. And in order to enforce those safeguards, even as a model provider, if you want to enforce those safeguards, you have to store a copy of that, the inputs and the outputs for a period of time to scan those things. That's one of the reasons. So I understand, why AI labs and inference providers have a policy where they are required in many cases to, store a copy of that data, and use it for scanning and make sure that nobody's abusing the system or nobody's using it for purposes that they should not be using it, like, creating new vulnerabilities in software or cyber offensive work or, whatever. You're just red teaming the model and you're trying to subvert the safeguards that have been encoded into the model weights. And on the other hand, enterprises also have a fair point. Like, they don't want their corporate information being stored, even if it's just for a day or two, by an Amazon or by, an AI lab or, anyone else. So it's a pretty, both the sides have a good balanced argument on that front. But you also mentioned, agent costs and providing, a budget to agents in the planning phase itself. And that's a pretty, popular pattern. Like, agents have a tool budget or, some sort of a budget to, that they have to remain or they have to follow in order to accomplish their objective. And if you do follow that pattern, that does result in slightly more optimal performance. So yeah, I think it's a pretty common pattern that we're seeing across the industry, or across most of the agentic frameworks or frameworks that are used to create agents.
Well, I feel like we have got a lot to chew on here. You've given us a lot of interesting ways of thinking through this sort of broader idea around how telemetry is changing, how we should approach this issue of observability writ large in this agentic era. So thank you for that. Before I wrap us up, though, entirely, where are you directing folks for more information, both around how Cribl is helping with this and for your own writing about this, which of course I've cited a few times?
Yeah, so we have a new research portal that's going to be coming up on Cribl.io. So we should post a link on that in the show notes, and then that would be the best place to get people plugged into what's happening as it relates to research and development in AI at the intersection of AI and telemetry. That's how I frame it. Right. So if you want to keep up, I would direct people there, and then I obviously have a LinkedIn and a Twitter profile as well.
Well, on that note, then, let's go ahead and wrap up. I've really enjoyed speaking with you today. My guest has been Nikhil. Again, my name is Kate Holterhoff. I'm a senior analyst at Redmonk. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please like, subscribe, and engage with us in the comments.